Hi, Peter Jones, author, property investor and ex-chartered surveyor, and in this video I want to look at buy-to-let lenders stress test and why does it matter? Well, it does matter actually, because if you want to do buy-to-let the BRR way, buy, refurbish, refinance, then the lender's stress test will actually set an upper limit to the value of the property that you can buy, which works within the system. But we will get onto that. Let's jump onto the computer and let me show you what we mean by the stress test. So let's have a look at an example of how the stress test could look when you take out a buy-to-let mortgage. And let's assume that you're about to buy a property and you're going to use a buy-to-let mortgage on an interest-only basis, and the amount that you're going to pay as interest, as at the date of recording this video, is probably going to be around about 3%. But that's not the rate at which the bank are going to stress test, because what is the stress test all about? Well, the stress test is to make sure that you can still afford to pay your mortgage if interest rates were to go up, and not just to pay the mortgage, but to be able to pay all the other costs associated with holding the property as well. We will come on to that. So in a typical stress test, the bank are going to use a rate which is not equivalent to the pay rate. They're going to use a higher rate. Now, if you want to know what rate they're going to use, you can go onto the bank's website. Most of the lenders will have the details of the stress test and how they calculate it on their website, or you could of course ask your mortgage broker. So in this hypothetical example, we're going to assume that the lender is going to want a stress test not at the 3% you're paying, but at, let's say, 5.5%. Now, to be absolutely clear, they stress test at the higher figure, but you still pay the lower figure, so you don't need to worry about that. So let's actually work this through using some real figures. Let's assume that you're going to buy a property which is worth £100,000. A typical buy-to-let mortgage nowadays is probably going to have a 75% loan to value, which means that you can borrow £75,000. So if we use the stress test rate of 5.5%, our hypothetical annual mortgage payment would be £4,125, which is equivalent to a monthly payment of £343.75. Now, in terms of calculating the stress test, there's now another step which the bank will introduce, and that is to multiply the amount of the monthly mortgage payment by a factor of, usually it's 125%, or it could be 150%. Again, if you want to know what the bank are going to use, you can usually find out on the website, or you can ask your broker. So in this particular hypothetical example, the lender want a stress test at 125%. which means that they're going to multiply the monthly mortgage payment by 125%. I'm not very good at maths, but that means basically multiplying the monthly mortgage payment by 1.25, and that brings up a figure of £429.69. Why do they do that? Because they want to make sure that when the interest rates go up, you can also afford to pay the holding costs of the property, because this is the last part of the stress test. They then say, okay, the monthly rent has got to be higher than £429.69 if we're going to lend you the £75,000 mortgage. It's only a hypothetical example, and I'm making this up clearly, but from my experience, a property of around about £100,000, depending upon where it is probably going to have a monthly rental of around about £600. So in this instance, I would expect that the property would pass the stress test with flying colours. There's plenty of leeway there. And that's showing the bank that there's plenty there for you to be able to afford the mortgage if interest rates go up, and you'll also be able to afford repairs and insurance and all the other bits and pieces which are holding costs of the property. So this one ticks the box, and they'll lend you the full amount of the mortgage. But what would happen if it didn't tick the box? What if it was that perhaps the stress test figure came out at, I don't know, £650 a month, but you're only going to receive £600 a month? Well, the bank wouldn't say, no, we're not going to lend you any money. But what they would do is that pro rata, they would pare back the amount that they're going to lend you. So instead of getting a 75% loan to value mortgage, once they've worked out the figures, it may turn out they will only give you a 65% loan to value mortgage. And this is exactly why, when the stress test comes into play, it limits the top end of the range of the value of properties which fit the BRR model, the buy, refurbish, refinance model, if you want to start getting all or most or some of your money back out of a deal. Because what we see is that rents do not keep up with capital values pro rata. So, for example, if you had a £100,000 property and the rental value is £600, if you came across a £200,000 property, the rental value is probably not going to be double £600. It's not going to be £1,200. It might turn out to be £950 or £900. And so by applying the stress test and looking at the monthly figures, you'll see that as properties get more and more expensive, it becomes harder and harder to pass the stress test. So when you get to a higher figure, which is probably a little bit over £200,000, but it's going to vary with every lender. This isn't a rule, by the way, it's only a guide. You'd have to do the sums yourself. And every lender uses different criteria. They could use a different stress test rate. They could use a different multiplier. So there is no one hard and fast, this is the right answer type approach to this. You just have to look. But chances are, probably, once you get into the 200,000s, you're going to find that you're not going to get the full 75% loan to value, which means it's going to be much harder to get your money back out, which means that the BRR model is less reliable. So that's just something to think about, and that is why the stress test is important. Now, do you have to go and calculate this yourself before you go and make offers on properties? Well, of course you don't, because all of this is actually worked through by your mortgage broker, and you should have a good mortgage broker. And I know I've offered before, I'm going to offer again. If you want a good mortgage broker, I can introduce you to my very good mortgage broker. All you have to do is email me, thepropertyteacher@gmail.com, thepropertyteacher@gmail.com, and I can put you in touch with my very good mortgage broker who can help you finance your deals. And he'll deal with all of this kind of stuff. He'll work out all the figures and he'll tell you what you can borrow, and he'll tell you what the implications are of what you can borrow, so you don't even need to understand this. But there you are, I've told you how it works, so that if it comes up in conversation, you'll understand exactly what your mortgage broker is talking about. I hope you found this video useful and informative, and if you did, then please come over to my website, www.thepropertyteacher.co.uk, where you'll find loads more great property-related resources, including free special reports to download, and my best-selling series of ebooks, which includes the Successful Property Renovators Workshop, 63 common defects in investment property and how to spot them. And if you're just starting out in property, or if you want to grow your portfolio, you may be particularly interested in the Successful Property Investors Strategy Workshop, in which I'll take you through exactly how I started and built my property portfolio, starting literally with none of my own money, and how I built a portfolio of £2 million worth of property in just 4 years. And that was starting from scratch. I'll take you through everything that I did right so that you can copy me and do the same. And I'll also show you everything that I did wrong so that you can avoid the mistakes that I made, and so that you can progress in property and be far more successful far more quickly than I ever was. And this is based upon my own real life experience, and it took me about 4 years to actually work out how to do property investing properly. But in the 200 pages in the Successful Property Investors Strategy Workshop, I'm going to show you all of that 4 years knowledge condensed down so that you can use it immediately. And until next time, here's to successful property investing.